Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
From Walnut, California.
Good morning. I'm Pennington. I'm an alcoholic. What a beautiful group of women. I want to thank the committee for allowing me the privilege of sharing with you this morning. It's I can't tell you what a miracle it is to be standing here. And after I speak for a few minutes, my voice will calm down, and maybe the blurring in my eyes will go away, and I'll be able to see. It's such a privilege to be here, and I'd like, although I'll touch on it later in my story, I'd like to share with you. Many of you know it. The young lady that read the traditions this morning is my niece, and I've been praying for her for 12 years. And a year and a half ago, I had the great joy of seeing God's working in her life. And it's such a treat to be at this conference with her. She went to a woman-to-woman conference with me last year in Santa Cruz, California. And I believe it was the first AA conference she'd been to. And we had a marvelous time, and we were able to share and talk about family. And we both kind of danced around a lot of stuff, and then at this conference we've come a little closer. She lives in Michigan, I live in California, so we most of our talking is done on the phone, and I'll touch on some of those things later in my share. There's some people I want to thank for other than just the committee. I spoke with my sponsor this morning. She lives in Florida now. And as I'm speaking this morning, my sponsor and her husband are praying for me. My church in California is having group prayer right now, and I'm in their prayers. And that's real special to me because, you know, when I walked in the doors of this program, there wasn't people asking me to come back, and there wasn't anybody praying for me to be much of any place other than in their immediate presence, out of their immediate presence. I was not one of those people that was welcomed with open arms in a lot of places when I walked in the doors of this program. I grew up in the Midwest, and I thought I grew up in a normal family. And, you know, that D word was not yet part of our vocabulary, and I didn't know that my family was any different than anybody else's family. I have a friend that says that if you think you're from a dysfunctional family, it's probably because you were part of it, and I believe that's probably true in my case. I don't remember my first drink, but I do have a picture of myself at about 18 months to 2 years of age sitting on my dad's lap, and he's holding out a beer bottle, and I have both hands outstretched. And I know that it was not unusual in my family for me to be at family parties, family reunions, and for me and all of my cousins that are the same age as I am to be walking around and taking swigs out of the beer bottles or out of the highball glasses. I didn't particularly care for alcohol when I was little, as far as I remember, but you know, I don't remember a lot of it. And when I got in school, when I was in high school, I was a jock. I was big in sports. I tried to be a cheerleader, and I went out for cheerleading, and they didn't, you know, in true alcoholic fashion, I hated tumbling and acrobatics, but I wanted to be a cheerleader. And they wouldn't let me be a cheerleader because I couldn't do those things. So I said, okay, I'll show you. So I went out for sports and made them cheer for me. I was on the swim team, I was on the basketball team, I was on the volleyball team, I was on the softball team, but I never did things to extreme, you understand. And I did those things all through high school. And I hung around with people who drank, I hung around with people who used and who smoked, and I didn't do that because, quote unquote, I was in training. And it wouldn't be healthy. And I was scared. I was scared of it. But, you know, I was scared of everything. I was sitting in the meeting on fear yesterday morning, and it was just a dynamic meeting because, and I've talked to a couple women here about it since then. You know, I sit in these rooms, I go out in the world out there, and I think, you know, I know what's going on in my gut. I know the fear that I have. But I look at all of you, and I'm going to tell you, none of you look like you have any fear in your lives. You look great. And I start comparing my insides with your outsides because you look so terrific. And I sit in a meeting on fear and I go, oh my goodness. And I had that in high school. I don't know if anybody else experienced it. I've heard some stories. I think you did. But I had all that fear in high school, and that's what pushed me to excel in sports. That's what pushed me to be involved in the things I was involved in. And at the same time, I didn't yet know that if I picked up a drink, that fear would be gone. And I didn't discover that until after I graduated from high school. I got engaged at my senior prom. I broke that engagement 5 times. The 5th time that we went back together, David said that if I gave the ring back to him one more time, he was going to walk out of my life and I was never going to see him again. I was 18 years old and I was afraid I was going to be an old maid. So I said, okay, fine, set a date. And we got married about 3 months later. There were friends that I did not invite to the wedding because I knew that they would try and tell me that I was making a mistake. And if anyone on my wedding day had told me that, I would have walked out of the church. At my wedding reception, I was walking. I'm still not drinking. I'm still this raging alcoholic with no booze in me. And I'm walking around at my wedding reception, and people say, "Oh, we're so happy for you. It's so wonderful." And I'm thinking, why? I mean, this marriage is going to end. Why are you happy for me? What's the big deal here? This is at my wedding reception. I didn't think there was anything wrong with this. I thought everybody went through this. People kept saying, "Oh, every bride has nerves. Why didn't somebody tell me wine would help them?" What happened was I married an alcoholic, and I found out about alcohol real quickly. I was drunk for our whole honeymoon. It's like, boy, this is great. If one makes me feel this good, think how good a case will make me feel. And it was off to the races. My husband and I were poor, and so he drank beer and I drank Ripple wine. I didn't like beer; it made me burp. But I never tried Eileen's idea of vinegar, water, and sugar. Sounds like a good diet drink. But I drank Ripple wine, and I think they still make Ripple wine, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked for it for a while. But I didn't like Ripple wine, but I could afford Ripple wine, and it used to come in bottles that had different color labels. So what I would do was I would buy a bottle of each color label, and then I'd go home and I'd pour it all into a big tub, and I'd mix it up, and then I'd pour it back into the bottles, and I had my own private label Rainbow Ripple. And this is what I would drink. Now, recently I was talking with some friends. I now work down in the Livermore Valley, and there's a number of wineries down there. I was talking with someone recently, and they were talking about wines that we drank when we were in high school and college, and somebody said something about Annie Green Springs. And I was telling someone yesterday afternoon, I remember buying a bottle of Annie Green Springs. The only other thing I remember is sitting on the roof of a house drinking Annie Green Springs out of the bottle. That was the way I drank, and that was the places my drinking took me to. My marriage didn't work. I left my husband when he threw me out the living room window for the 2nd time. Some of us are sicker than others. He was physically violent when he was drinking, and I walked away from him. We tried a trial separation, and we went back together, and then we were in a motorcycle accident, and I was nearly killed. And he promised me that he would change his drinking. He'd do something about his drinking, and our marriage would be better. And I believed him, and I had no place to go when I left the hospital. So I went back, and a couple months later, he tried to kill me again. And I walked out, and I had no idea where to go. I was afraid to tell my parents what had happened because my parents didn't like him, and I just had this fear of going to my parents and saying I made a mistake. What I know now is that my parents love me very much, and they were willing to love me through that, but I didn't know that because I knew how I felt inside, and I knew how I felt about myself. I had to come to this program to find low self-esteem because I had none when I was out there drinking. I called my sister and asked if I could come stay with her for a while, and I moved in with my sister and her 2 daughters, and my sister and I drank together. All I remember is drinking. I remember that we'd come home from parties, and the next morning we'd go out and check the back of the car and the front of the car to see if we'd hit anything backing out or driving home. And then I met a man. I was out on a date with this guy that I didn't want to go out with, and his best friend came along, and I figured the best way to get rid of this one guy is to flirt with his best friend, and 6 months later we were married. And from the very beginning, he thought that I had a problem with alcohol. The first time we went out on a date, I was still an underage drinker. I switched drinks in every bar we went to. I passed out in a bar and fell out of the booth, and he had to carry me out of the bar. But I didn't think I had a problem with booze, and he kept telling me, you don't drink like other people. And I thought, well, they just don't know how to party. They don't know how to have a good time. And every drink I picked up, I thought, this is the one that's going to fix it. This is the one that's going to make me better. I had stood on the steps of a church a couple years before that and told God in very frank, four-letter words to get out of my life that I wanted nothing to do with the God that had put me in the situations my God had put me in. I couldn't see that I had any responsibility in the places I was going and the things I was doing. And I certainly didn't see that alcohol had any problem with that. And I had told God I didn't want him in my life. And that's an empty feeling when the only thing that's going to fill up that gut is booze and drugs. I married this man, my second husband, and our marriage was on the rocks from the beginning as well. I was drinking, I was having affairs. We moved to Hawaii to try and do something about my drinking. Dara and I were talking about this the other day. It took me about 3 days to find out how the liquor laws worked, to find a bar and to find some friends, and it was off to the races. And this was the place that was going to fix it all. It's the typical geographic. If only we weren't around family. If only we didn't have the friends we had. If we went someplace and made new friends. If I didn't hang out with the people I hung out with. And what I didn't know is that every place I went, I took myself with me. And that I had nothing to fall back on other than booze and drugs. It took me a little while longer to find the pushers, but I found those too. And I made new friends, and they all partied the way I partied, and I just couldn't understand how people could get through a day without a drink. In 1976, I think it was 1975 or 1976, my sister called and asked if Sue could come, my niece Sue could come and stay with me for a while and go to school out there. And so Sue flew out and stayed with me for the last year of my drinking. We were talking about this yesterday, and neither one of us remember much of that year. So we figured that the amends list is kind of even there. But I was in my raging alcoholism, and I'm not taking her inventory, but she was in her raging teenagers. And I was 25 years old and had never had children and was suddenly thrown into being the mother or aunt or whatever responsible adult, oh God, sure, of a 16-year-old. And it was scary, and I didn't know how to do it. And I resorted to the only thing I knew how to do when I was afraid, and that was to drink. And I don't remember hardly anything of that year. Shortly after she left to go back to the mainland, I knew that I was having a nervous breakdown. And I was afraid of that. I was afraid to have a nervous breakdown. It was what I really wanted, because if you had a nervous breakdown, someone would take care of you. But I didn't want to go into one of those state hospitals that they might put you in where they're really rude. I thought if I had a really expensive psychiatrist, that if I had a nervous breakdown, I could go into a private sanitarium and I'd be taken care of, and that's what I really needed, was just a rest. I just needed to be taken care of. So I found a psychiatrist and I went to see him, and we sat down to talk, and he said, so what's wrong? And I said, well, I just don't like myself, I don't like the way I look, and I don't like the things I do, and I don't like the way I think, and I didn't say a word about the way I drank. And he said, oh, well, let's start with your weight. Here's some diet pills. Oh, this was fun. So from the very first prescription, I went to the pharmacist and I said, listen, I'm going out of town for a while. It's a family emergency. I have no idea how long I'm going to be gone, but I know it would be terribly difficult to get a refill for this prescription on the mainland. Do you think you could just give me all my refills? And he said, oh, sure, no problem. A week later, my house was clean, my pool was clean, my car was clean, my pets were clean. I
I was clean. Everything was clean. You know, the toothbrushes were clean.
And I went back and I said, these pills don't seem to be working for me. And he said, well then, why don't we try these? And I went to a different pharmacy and a different pharmacist, and I said, there's a family emergency, and I'm going out of town. Do you think? Oh, sure, no problem. And I probably had the cleanest house and the cleanest pools and the cleanest cars, and I was climbing up the walls and scrubbing them on my way. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong in my life. I could not figure out what was wrong. And my husband had told me at one point, my husband had used that word, you're just an alcoholic. So I decided I'd prove that he was wrong. That's what really had motivated me to get to the psychiatrist, is that I was proving that I wasn't wrong. I had given up booze. And so I was going through withdrawal. That's why I went to the shrink. That's why I was having this nervous breakdown, you see. But I didn't know that because I couldn't deal with reality without a buffer. That was sometime in the summer of 1977. I know that while I was doing speed, I drank. I have no idea how much or how often. I didn't even remember that I had done speed until I was sober for 6 months in this program. And in October of that year, of 1977, my life was falling apart. I'd done all the things it talks about in Chapter 3. You know, I'd switched from wine to vodka. I'd sworn off with and without a solemn oath. I'd taken more physical exercise. I'd gotten involved. Once again, sports were going to be my answer. And I'd gotten involved in a mixed league softball league. And I was at a softball game, and I was just out of it. I had no idea if I had a hangover, if I was drunk. I just remember being at the softball game and just missing a really easy play. And my coach pulled me out of the game, and I called him every name in the book. I questioned whether his mother knew who his father was. I just, I held nothing back, and not that nicely, got in my car and stormed off and decided that the only solution left for me was to kill myself. And I was going to run my car off of Diamond Head Road. And somewhere in the back of my mind knew that I couldn't do that without taking a drink. That at the last minute I was going to pick my foot up off the accelerator, and I wasn't going to hit the wall hard enough, and I wasn't going to go over it, and I wasn't going to die. That what would happen was I'd be an invalid. And I didn't want that. I wanted just to be free from this world. So I went home to fix myself a drink, and I walked in my house, I fixed the drink, and for some reason, and I know today what that reason is, I put the drink down, walked the full length of the house, and picked up the phone and called Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I would love to stand here and tell you that I had this marvelous moment of clarity, and that what happened was I called AA and I said, yes, I need help. And they said, okay, fine, go to a meeting, and I said, okay, fine. I'd love to tell you that. That's not how I did it. I called Alcoholics Anonymous, and this woman answered the phone, and that did it right there. I didn't like women when I walked in the doors of this program. I want to tell you that I love the men in this program, but you women have saved my life. And I am so grateful for you. This woman answered the phone, and I said, I have a friend that I think has a problem. Maybe you could tell me something about your program. And she said, well, maybe you and your friend would like to go to a meeting. Oh, I don't think my friend would want to do that. Maybe you could send me some literature. I thought I could do a correspondence course. She said, well, it's our policy that we not send out literature. We'd ask you to go to a meeting and pick some up. I can tell you where there's a meeting near you. And I said, oh, no, I don't think so. Maybe you could just tell me about your program, and then I could tell my friend about it. So she started talking about this program, and as many of you know, it's hard to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous without talking about a higher power. She used the word God. I said, well, I don't believe in God. She said, oh, does your friend believe in God? I allowed as how maybe I might go to a meeting. So she told me where there was a meeting,
And she told me to walk into the room and go up to the first woman I saw and tell her I was a newcomer. So I went to this meeting, took a shower first. I don't know how long it had been since I'd taken a shower, but I took a shower. Took a shower, went to this meeting, walked into the room. There was no one in the room except for one person, a woman. God knew what he was doing. Walked up to her, and before I could say anything, I started crying. And she says, "Oh, you're a newcomer." She took me around and introduced me to women. They gave me their phone numbers. Men gave me their phone numbers. The women took them away from me. I didn't like this deal. You know, this wasn't going to work. So I sat through my first meeting. The secretary of the meeting, you know, at most meetings, they say, you know, we'd like to know if there's any newcomers. It's not to embarrass you, just so we can get to know you. And do we have anyone that's at their first meeting? And I raised my hand. I'm still crying. You know, I raised my hand, and he said, "Would you like to give us your name?" I said, "No." Okay. So I have no idea what they said at my first meeting. I know what I didn't hear. I didn't hear anything about the big book, and I didn't hear anything about the steps, and I didn't hear anything about the traditions. I didn't hear anything about other meetings. I will also tell you that that's what I didn't hear. I know that in every meeting I go to in Honolulu, Hawaii, they read Chapter 5 out of the Big Book, and they read the traditions. And I'm sure they did that on October 9th, 1977. I just didn't hear it. So I left that meeting and, you know, got out. As soon as they said the Lord's Prayer, I was out the door. And I went home, and I didn't drink. I thought it was like Weight Watchers. You know, I'd come back next week, and I'd get my card, and they'd tell me who would stamp it, and I would go to Sunday night AA. And so I didn't go to any meetings that week, and I didn't use any phone numbers, and I didn't talk to anybody, but I didn't drink because I had joined the Sunday night AA meeting. And so a week later, I went to my Sunday night AA meeting, and I walked in, and the first woman I had talked to, Blanche, was there, and she said, "Oh, hi, how are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm fine." And she said, "How many meetings did you make this week?" And I said, "Well, I was here last Sunday night." And she said, "Yes, but how many meetings did you make this week?" And I said, "Well, last Sunday night." And she said, no, dear, that's not how it works." So she sat me down, and she showed me the meeting schedule again. And she marked some meetings for me to meet her at. I didn't like that, but she did it. And I somehow was blessed with coming into the program around people who believe very strongly in the Big Book, who believe very strongly that recovery in this program is through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to meetings, and I still had this fear. I came to the one place where I could say I needed help, and I was afraid to tell you that. I took the booze and the drugs out of me, and I didn't replace it with AA, and I didn't replace it with God. And I went to meetings, and I pretended that I did. And I did that for 18 months. You know, I was listening to Marcia talk on Friday night when she was talking about 3 years and what she went through at that point. And I did that. I went to meetings, and I just was afraid to tell you what was going on inside of me. I was afraid to have a higher power, and I was afraid not to have a higher power. I was afraid to work the steps, and I was afraid not to work the steps. I had these two fears about the steps. My fear about the steps was that they weren't going to work for me. You know, I could sit in meetings, and I could listen to you talk about the steps, and you'd tell me about these wonderful things that happened to you when you worked the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I knew that if I worked the steps, that wasn't going to happen for me because I knew where I came from. I knew what was going on inside. That was my first fear. My other fear was that they would. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be like you people, you know? It was like, you know, you did good things and you smiled a lot, but you spent all your time in AA meetings. Why would I want to do that? You know, what about my friends? You know, none of my friends that I drank with ever checked to see what had happened to me. Not one of them. But I hung around with people that worked the steps. I went to meetings and I listened to people share in meetings. I paid particular attention to those things that people shared where other people nodded. And then I'd go to another meeting and pass it off as my own. I didn't have anything inside to share, so I shared other people's inside. And people came up to me after the meeting and they said, "Penny, you are doing so well." And I would think, why do I hurt so badly? Why do I have this pain in my gut? And I'd listen to you talk about the steps, and when I'd listen to you talk about the steps in meetings, they sounded so easy to work. And I'd go home and I'd open my book and I'd go, how do they do that? I just couldn't figure it out. And I did that for 18 months. In that time, I tried living sober the same way I'd been living drinking. I got involved in a relationship. I came home when I had about 3 months of sobriety. I was still married when I came into this program, although you wouldn't know it from my behavior. And I came home 2 days after Christmas. In 1977, I'd been out shopping or something. There was a note in the family room from my husband that said he was gone out of town on business, he'd be back in a week, and we needed to talk. That's 12 years ago, and he's not home yet. I called a friend of mine in the program, and when I figured out that he might not be coming back, and she said, well, come on over and we'll go to a meeting and things will get better. So I went over and we went to a meeting, and a couple of weeks after that I found out, well actually I guess a few days after that, I found out that he had emptied out all of our bank accounts. He had closed out everything with the business that we owned, all of the bank accounts for our business. He hadn't paid any bills for the past several months, personal or business, and I was on the books as an officer of that business. And I called my sponsor, and she said, well, come on over and we'll go to a meeting and things will get better. So then I got evicted from our house, and I called my sponsor, and she said, well, come on over, we'll go through the classifieds, we'll find a place for you to live, and things will get better. My car was repossessed, and it's funny because I had talked to my sponsor. I was having this problem with God, and I talked to my sponsor, and she said, she suggested that what I start doing is just thanking God for everything that happened to me, good and bad. And I had about 6 months of sobriety yet, and I wasn't even sure that there was a God, but I figured I'd use Susan's God. So I was thanking God for everything that happened to me, good. And she said, no, Penny, good and bad. And just as I hung up the phone from talking to her, there was a knock on my door, and this fellow said that he was there to repossess my car. And did I have anything in it I would like to get out of it? And I'm walking up to my car going, I don't know why I'm doing this, but thank you, God. And I called my sponsor, and she said, you just told me yesterday you wanted to be getting more exercise. Does anyone in this room have a sponsor like that? So she said, do you have a quarter for the bus? Come on over and we'll go to a meeting and things will get better. I was home studying for final exams one day, and there was a knock on the door. I was being served papers, and I was being sued for breach of contract, for every contract that our company, my husband's and my company, had held. That the amount was well over $500,000. I was on food stamps and financial aid to stay in school, and they were suing me for $500,000. I called my sponsor, and she said, come on over and we'll go to a meeting, and Penny, sometimes things have to get a lot worse before they can get a lot better. And you know, it's funny, I was talking with my sponsor recently, and she made the comment that she's now sponsoring someone that reminds her a lot of me, of how I was when I was new. And I said to her, oh, you poor dear. And she said, oh no, you were wonderful, you did everything I told you to do. And I said, no, Susan, I lied. I didn't do anything. I still wasn't working the steps. I still didn't believe in God. I was still using all of your experience, strength, and hope. I didn't have any of my own. I didn't know what experience, strength, and hope was. And I was sitting in meetings still comparing myself out. I sat in speakers meetings and I tried to figure out if they said that they're this old when they got sober, how old are they now? And how old are their kids, and how long would they be married? And I'm off doing this mental math, and I'm missing anything that they might have to say that I could use. And my sponsor didn't know this until I told her this about a month ago. And so I'm no longer, her perfect pigeon. I never was, but I tried to pretend I was. At 18 months of sobriety, I was in the same place that I'd been at when I walked in the doors of this program. The only answer for me now was suicide. I had tried Alcoholics Anonymous. It clearly did not work for me. I did not see, once again, I did not see that it was anything I was or was not doing. I just knew that this program was not working for me like it was working for you, and there was no other answer for me than to kill myself. And I decided in, grandiose alcoholic fashion that what I was going to do was I was going to go to a meeting, and it was going to be the last meeting I was going to make because I was going to kill myself the next day. And then when you all heard about it, you were all going to feel really bad that you had not said something to me that might have saved my life. It was your fault. So I went to a meeting, and a friend of mine was celebrating a year of sobriety, and I walked into this meeting, and I did not get any attention in this meeting. My friend Ken did. It was his first birthday. There were some people going out for coffee afterwards, and they invited me to go with them. And I thought, well, maybe someone will say something to me there. So I walked. I didn't have resentments, you understand. So I went over for coffee, and this was not the place I wanted to be. I started to walk out. I was angry. I was hungry. I was lonely. I was tired. I just couldn't do this anymore. And I walked out of the room, and a fella grabbed me and kind of pushed me up against the wall. And he said, Penny, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to die. He didn't tell me you're going to get drunk. He didn't say you're going to keep getting what you're getting. He told me I was going to die. I did not kill myself the next day because I did not want that man to know that I had committed suicide. It was going to look like an accident. So that resentment, I truly believe, saved my life. What happened the following week was that a woman from Southern California came to the islands to visit her son. And she thought when she got on the plane that he was sober in this program. When she arrived in Hawaii, she found out that he was not. And she was not comfortable staying in his home, and she needed a place to stay, and she was in one of our meetings, and she shared this. And I went up to her, God working in my life. I walked up to her, and I said, well, I have a place that you could stay at. If you'd like to stay with me, you're welcome to stay with me. And what I was thinking was this was a whole new audience. Maybe she would fix me. I still couldn't work the steps to fix me. I still couldn't use the program to fix me. I was still looking for something outside to fix me and to make me better. So Kay came to stay at my house, and I thought this was a whole new audience for everything that was going on in my life. And I started telling her this tale of woe, these awful things that you had done to me, that God had done to me, that had happened in my life through no fault of my own, you understand. And Kay looked at me and she said, Penny, that's very interesting, but your problem is alcohol and you haven't worked the steps. And I said, oh, but you see, you don't understand. So I'd tell her another part of my story, and she said, Penny, that's very interesting, but your problem is alcohol and you haven't worked the steps. And no matter what I said, my problem was alcohol and I hadn't worked the steps. So I worked the steps to prove to Kay that they wouldn't work for me. And the steps don't know who's working them. The steps just work. The steps don't know how many times I've worked them. The steps just work. My problem is alcohol, and I need to work the steps. The first time I worked the steps, I did them for all of you. That was the way I was. You can thank me later. I admitted that I was powerless over alcohol and that you had become unmanageable in my life. And I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore you to sanity. And I made a decision to turn you all over to the care of that God. Now, I still didn't believe in God, but I was getting closer to it. And then I made a shallow and fearful moral inventory. Now I want to tell you that on page 65 of our big book, there's 3 columns: I'm resentful at, the cause, and what it affects. There are then, I think, 7 or 8 pages that talk about what you do with those first 3 columns. I didn't read pages 66 through 71. I just read the 3 columns. So I put my first husband there, and my second husband, and my first husband's second wife, and my second husband's first wife, and my stepchildren, and my in-laws, and my ex-in-laws. And I put down what they did and what it affected. And then I shared that with someone. And I talked about all of these defective characters in my life. Now, I did my 5th step with someone that had never done a 5th step, had never heard a 5th step, and I'm not sure he was sober when he heard mine. And he thought this was fine. That was great. That was a terrific 5th step. Burn it and go on to 6 and 7. So, I was entirely ready to have God remove all you defective characters from my life, and humbly asked Him to remove you. I couldn't understand why my life wasn't changing and I wasn't getting those promises you were telling me about in this book. It did not make sense to me. I finally talked to my sponsor about it. See, all of this I'm doing without a sponsor. I didn't want her to know how sick I was. I was afraid if I told her my 4th step that she would run screaming into the night. And I have a friend who says that, and when she told her 4th step, when she shared her 5th step with her sponsor fell asleep. I didn't quite have that happen, but she kept saying, and what else? I just wasn't that good at being that bad. I had tried. I'd done it for as long as I could, but I just couldn't do that anymore. And I'd been as bad as I could be, and I finally got around to, through my sponsor and through some wonderful step meetings, to looking at what the steps really said for me. And what happened for me was that going through the steps that first time in that way, and not feeling any of those things you all told me I was going to feel, got me down on my knees. And I started to let God into my life. I was told one time that AA is where ex-Catholics meet in Protestant basements to learn about God. And I am a former Catholic, a recovering Catholic, and I had this real problem with God. I have no idea what the church taught me about God. I really don't. I have no idea what Father Pilarowski taught me about God or what Sister Mary Almerita taught me about God. What I heard, and that's been a lot of my problem, I don't know what they said, I only know what I heard. What I heard them say was that God was a punishing God and I was going to burn in hell. And my attitude was, if I'm going to burn in hell for that, I'm going to have a good time here if that's where I'm going. And that's what I had done. And so I still had that image of that God in my head. What happened was I had the opportunity to share with some people that I wasn't sure about this path I was walking towards God. And I wasn't finding a higher power that I felt was a personal higher power. And people kept saying to me, both in this program and outside of this program, if you need a higher power, use mine. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to pray to Doris's God or to Eileen's God. And I was so afraid. I still didn't have any hope in my life. I'm very strong in the traditions of this program. There is another book that I use in my sobriety. It's not conference approved, but it's often referred to as the big book by some people. And there's a chapter and a verse in there that speaks of faith, hope, and love, and that the greatest of these is love. My sponsor pointed out to me that the first of those is faith, and I just couldn't find that faith. And because I couldn't find that faith, I didn't think I had any hope, and I knew I would never find love. I sat in these meetings and you people told me, just let us love you until you can learn to love yourself. And I smiled and I said, thank you, sure. And my gut said, you don't understand. I'm not lovable. You can't love me. You don't know me. And I was so afraid that you were going to find out the things I thought and the things I said and the things I did, and you just were not going to accept me, and you wouldn't love me. And I had that fear. And somehow God put people in my life. I remember saying, God's just out to get me, and I truly believe He was, but not in the sense that I thought. And I truly believe today that God put people in my life to bring me back to Him. And my first concept of a God sober was the God that I'd had as a little kid. The first prayer that I remember saying in this program was, now I lay me down to sleep. And I will tell you that 12 years sober, that is the prayer I went to sleep with last night. And that's the God that I have today. It's a loving God that is my friend. He doesn't care how I talk to Him. He doesn't care if I scream at Him. He never screams back. He just loves me. And my concept of God continues to change. I started with now I lay me down to sleep. I started risking a little bit and trusting Him with some things, turning some things over to Him, and He handled them. He didn't always answer my prayers the way I thought they should be handled, but He certainly gave me what I needed. And He certainly put people in my life that have just truly blessed me. I heard a man speak one time, and he talked about when he came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he just couldn't let you people in, and that you all did the only thing you could do for him. You prayed for him. And I truly believe that that's what happened for me, was that people in these rooms prayed for me. I found a higher power, and through my sponsor's guidance and through some marvelous step meetings and wonderful big book thumpers back in Hawaii, I worked the steps. When I was 2.5 years sober, when I was a year sober, God gave me a job, and I didn't intend to take the job. I had all these reasons why I shouldn't take the job, but God wanted me there, and as Marcia said, what God wants, God gets. And I took a job. At 2.5 years of sobriety, I was at a conference, a business conference, and I had 5 job offers in 2 days, and I wasn't looking for another job, and every single job was in Washington, D.C. And I called my sponsor, and she said, well, have you read the promises on page 83 and 84? Maybe you should intuitively know. And I said, oh, no, see, you don't understand. But what I did at that point was I said, well, gee, God, thanks, you did a real great job, and I can take it from here. And I picked out which job I should have. And I moved to Washington, D.C. I sold half of my belongings, shipped the rest of them, arrived in Washington, D.C., walked into a law firm to go to work for them, and the senior partner that had offered me the job was out of the office that day. One of the other partners spoke with me and said, well, he wasn't authorized to offer you the position he offered you, but we can make you a receptionist. I was very angry. I was very resentful. Everything I owned was in transit, and I was very scared. And I didn't know what to do, so I went to a meeting. I called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they said that there was a meeting near where I was, near the office. I went to the meeting, and someone at the meeting was talking about turning things around and trying to look at them a different way. And what I did was I looked at that job as a receptionist. They were going to pay me the same amount of money as the other job they'd offered me. But I didn't have to come in until 10 o'clock in the morning. I worked till 6 o'clock at night. And I always had a reason to be on the telephone. So I was able to go to morning meetings. My home group became the Yeas and Nays group that meets in the nation's capital.
And turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop the machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you. At this time, please stop your machine and turn the tape for the rest of the message. Thank you.
In the city, when evening meetings were starting, I went to evening meetings, and I always had a reason to be on the phone. And I got right into Alcoholics Anonymous. And the same thing happened to me that happened to Eileen when she moved back to Eugene. People said, how do you know all these people? How do you have all these friends? You just moved here. You know? And it's like, people were picking me up at work. I had people to go to lunch with. And for a year, I did that job. At the end of that year, I had a job offer to go to work for the company that I'm still with. And it was exactly what I wanted to do. It's in the security field. I didn't talk about being a cop. I used to be, I'm not anymore. It's in the security field, and it's in the energy field, and it's a real dynamic industry, and it's a lot of fun. I used to be, it's changing a lot now, but I used to be one of the few women involved in the field. And I do great work, and I just love my job. The people that I work with are just fantastic, and I just really love what I do. I got very involved in the meetings in Virginia. I went to meetings when I moved from Hawaii to Virginia. I had only traveled a little bit when I lived in the islands to go to other meetings. And when I moved to Virginia, I went to meetings and I said, hi, my name's Penny Pennington, I'm an alcoholic, and you're not doing it right. And they said, hi, Penny, keep coming back. And I went to meetings, I didn't even remember that I did this either, except my sponsor's husband told me this. And I went to meetings for a year doing that, because they weren't doing it right. They don't do it the same. They don't start the meeting with the Serenity prayer, and they don't read chapter 5. They have the secretary's report, and they pass the basket in the middle of the meeting. They do close with the Lord's Prayer. And I call my sponsor back in Hawaii, and I say, they're not doing it right. And she said, Penny, are they staying sober? And I said, yes. And she said, Penny, are they working the steps? And I said, yes. And she said, then they're doing just fine. At 7 years of sobriety, I had the chance to go back to Hawaii to celebrate my AA birthday, and they don't do it right. In 1986, I got a call from one of the fellows that I work with, and he's with our Albuquerque office, and he called and asked if I'd be willing to come out to California for about 6 to 8 weeks to work on a project. And I said, oh, I'd love to. I love to travel on my company's money, and I love to have the chance to travel and go to AA meetings when I'm on travel and meet new friends, and I just love doing that. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I wasn't quite sure where Livermore was, and I had to look it up on the map. And so I came out to Livermore, California for 6 to 8 weeks. And 3 months later, when I was still in California, and I didn't know what was going on, I came out here in December of '86, came out to California in December of '86. In May of '87, I was going home for a weekend trip back to Virginia. And I got as far as Chicago O'Hare Airport. And I was in tears. I got off the plane from San Francisco at Chicago O'Hare, and I could not move. I could not walk across and go down the jetway to get on the plane to go to Washington, D.C. I was just incapable of doing that. And I'm standing in the middle of Chicago O'Hare Airport in tears. And I walked up to the gate attendant, and I asked if there was any way to get my baggage off of the plane. And he said, "No, ma'am, we're getting ready to leave." And I said, "Okay, fine." And I started to turn away. He said, "Are you going to get on the plane?" I said, "No, I can't do that." My sponsor at this time was living in Indiana, and I called her in tears, and she answered the phone, and I said, "Susan, this is Penny." And she said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at Chicago O'Hare Airport." She said, "Can you get on a plane to Indianapolis?" And I said, "I don't know if I can do that." She said, "Call me back and tell me what time your flight gets in." She didn't say, "Oh, sure you can." She just said, "Call me back." And so I just did it. I got on. I got a reservation to Indianapolis. I flew to Indianapolis. My sponsor and her husband picked me up. I spent the weekend with she and her husband. Wrote a 4-step, did a 5th step, did a big book study with them. Got on a plane and flew to Washington, D.C. and talked to my next door neighbor, who is one of my dearest friends that is not in this program. Told her that I was going to ask for a transfer to California. It seemed like the right thing to do. I just didn't know, but I had to see if God was going to open doors. And Karen's immediate response was, "What are you going to do about your house?" And I said, "Well, I don't know," because I was making mortgage payments on this empty house in Virginia because I was in California. And she said, "Well, if you're going to sell it, I'm going to buy it." And I said, "Okay." So then I called my boss, and I asked. I still hadn't talked to my boss about a transfer. And I called my boss. I told him I wanted a transfer to California, that they were either going to move me back to Virginia or they were going to move me to California, but I couldn't continue to travel like this. I couldn't handle it. And my boss said, "There's just no way we can do that. We can't get the commitment from the client that we need to justify your move." And I asked him what we needed from the client, and he said, "We need at least a 12-month contractual commitment from them." And I said, "Okay, if I can get that, can I move?" And he said, "Yes." So I went to the client, and they gave me a 24-month contractual commitment. I called my boss, and I told him, and he said, "Okay, let me run it past the home office." He ran it by the home office. They approved it. They said, "Okay, fine." I was supposed to be getting on a plane to fly back to the East Coast on the 1st of July, and my transfer was approved at 4 o'clock on June 30th. And my God has a marvelous sense of humor. I flew back to Washington and picked up my car, drove to Michigan. My younger brother was getting married. And got my younger brother married and had a marvelous conversation with my older niece. And she wanted to know if I knew anything about adult children for alcoholics. And I'm real clear about my sister's drinking. But I think that people out there can't see it. So I asked my niece, who grew up in this household, this is her mother, I asked her, I said, "Does your dad drink?" So I had the opportunity to make amends to her. I had the opportunity to make amends to my brother. I was one of those people that didn't think I had damaged my family. And at 10, 11, and 12 years of sobriety, I've just started coming to terms with opening up with my family and realizing that there are places where I've owed amends that I never knew. So I made amends, and a fella that I had been dating in California flew to Michigan and drove cross-country with me. I drove looking for bus stations and airports to drop him off at. It was a real interesting trip. I married him. We got to California. I flew back to Washington or to Virginia and packed up my house and started having it shipped across. My furniture arrived on a Wednesday. On Thursday, the client came into my office and said, we just lost the budget, you don't have a contract. And I called my boss, and he said, okay, let's see what we can do. Through God's work, I still continue to live and work in California for the same client. I've done a few other jobs in between there, but I'm still with my company. I'm still with the same client. And a year ago in January, my husband and I got married. And profound changes have occurred in my life. When I walked in the doors of this program, I remember someone telling me that if I sat down and wrote down everything I wanted in my life, I would be cutting myself short. And I'm here to tell you that 12 years ago, if I had tried to write down what I wanted in my life, you people wouldn't be here this morning. Because I didn't think I wanted women for friends. My husband wouldn't be in my life. You know, the joy of one of the joys of this weekend is that 2 years ago I flew back home because I was concerned about my niece's drinking, and I decided that if nothing else, she was never going to be able to say she didn't know about Alcoholics Anonymous. And we went out to lunch and we sat and we talked about AA. And I told her that I didn't care where she was or when it was. If she ever wanted to know, that she could call me. And it'll be 2 years this July that I got a phone call from Suzanne that she was in treatment. And I can't tell you the joy that brings to my life. There are times when I can't believe that God loves me this much. I am just amazed. And, you know, as I said earlier, my sponsor pointed out that of faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love. But the first of these is faith. I didn't have faith when I came here. You people brought me to God. And I thank God for AA. I thank you people for my God. You gave me hope by sharing your experience and strength. That's how I got it. And today I truly know that I am loved. My license plate on my car says I am loved. The world knows that I am loved. I hope to see many of you at Bill W.'s family reunion in Seattle. Thank you.